A while ago, fellow paint nerd P. Nightwind hosted a big paint ranking on Instagram, and I could hardly believe the results. Apparently, one of the best red paints came from the Green Stuff World's Maxx Formula line. Makes Green Stuff World a sleeper hit paint range that nobody talks about? For this video review, I got my hands on the entire Green Stuff World paint catalog, and I must say the answer isn't that simple. I'm Stahly from Tale of Painters, the mysterious masked guy who tests every hobby paint range on YouTube. And before you give this video a thumbs down, here's a quick disclaimer. Yes, I'm aware Green Stuff World has been involved in a few controversies in the past. Actually, Spanish hobby companies seem to have a bit of a reputation in that regard. But I don't see myself as an influencer. I'm here to test every product as unbiased as possible and give you all the information you need so you can make a well-informed decision for yourself. And if you don't want to support Green Stuff World, I completely understand. But please don't give this video a thumbs down, that only hurts my channel, not Green Stuff World. Just watch one of my other reviews instead, like the one up here, and go for a different brand. There's plenty of choice in the hobby market these days. I'll help you find the best miniature paints for your needs. Having said that, let's get to the paints. Green Stuff World is mostly known for their accessories and effect paints. In this video, I'll be focusing on the Maxx Formula range, which is Green Stuff World's second generation of acrylic paints. But at the end of the video, I'll also share my thoughts on some of the other ranges, like the heavy opaque paints, their metallics and washes, so stay tuned. The Maxx Formula range is only 104 colors, which are available individually or in a variety of paint sets. There are two large sets with 48 colors, as well as numerous themed sets of 8 colors each. The paints come in standard-sized dropper bottles containing 70 ml of paint and a metal mixing ball. So far, so familiar, nothing to nitpick here, except that the black caps seem to be made from a fairly cheap plastic. They often seem to shed little bits when opening the bottles for the first time, which is a bit annoying. Now let's test the actual paint and find out whether the reds are really as good as my buddy from Instagram claims. Here I have Red Truth from P. Nightwind's aka Resin Poisonings comparison and put it on the palette. The consistency surprised me at first. Can you see it's very homogeneous but quite thin? It reminds me a bit of pre-thinned airbrush paints like Vallejo Game Air. I prefer when the paint is not too thick, but combined with the moisture of my wet palette, it's actually a bit too thin for my liking. As you can always thin down a thick paint, but thickening up thin paint is much harder. Let's not be too biased though and see how the paint performs on a model. I've got one of my little Stahly test models here, primed in grey. Thanks to its thin consistency, the paint flows nicely from the brush and applies extremely smoothly, almost like airbrushed. However, because the paint is so fluid, the pigments tend to gather in the recesses, a bit like a wash. It's not much of an issue with darker, more muted colors, as you can see later in the video, but with lighter paints you need to be more careful, like red, yellow and bone, which naturally don't cover that well. Here I tried a lighter red and needed about 5 coats to get an even coverage. I've noticed that a lot of colors have a tendency to leave small bubbles on the model if you don't take your time applying even layers, similar to Vallejo Game and Model Color. On the flip side, the paints are brilliant for airbrushing and require very little thinning. Thanks to their thin consistency and vibrant pigmentation, they also dilute well. Here I thinned Sangria Red into a glaze using water and a drop of contrast medium. It performed beautifully, great for blending and feathering. That's partly because the drying time gives you a fairly generous working window, slightly longer than what you get with Citadel Color or Warpaint's Fanatic, but not as long as, say, 2 thin coats. As you can see, Sangria Red has a cooler undertone, which brings me to a slightly more subjective point. With 104 colors, the Maxx Formula range is relatively small and doesn't offer quite as much variety as some competing paint ranges. That said, there's a bit of everything and there are no major gaps in the palette. Still, I find a lot of the colors a bit uninspiring, probably because many of them tend to have a cooler or more neutral undertone. And speaking about the color palette, a word of warning. The official product images are sometimes way off from how the colors look in real life, especially the depiction in this printed pamphlet. Most colors are too dark and many look more muddy or brownish than they actually are. And the comparison chart you can download from Green Stuff World's website is a complete disaster. The suggested matches don't match at all. Now, if you know my channel, you'll know I'm a complete paint nerd, so I had to make a better swatch for the Maxx Formula range. Thanks to my years of experience as a graphic designer and my color-calibrated workflow, my hand-painted swatches are the closest thing to actually holding the real paints in your hands. You'll find the Maxx Formula swatch on my Patreon, alongside my library of cross-compatible charts for all major paint ranges. They are available for a small donation, so I can keep providing free updates and expansions and cover even more paint ranges in the future. So next comes the edge highlights test using Amber Orange. I usually prefer a slightly thicker consistency for highlighting, but it still goes on nicely thanks to the excellent flow properties. The consistency just takes a bit of getting used to. The same is true for dry brushing, as the consistency is so thin that I'd recommend letting the paint dry a little on a dry palette first. The armor is now done, and I have to say I really like the different shades of red. They're vibrant and highly pigmented. I can definitely see why Red Truth scored so highly with my mate on Instagram. Another plus is that Maxx Formula paints are very stable on a wet palette and don't separate, even after sitting out for a while. Now I'm moving on to the face to try out some of the browns and skin tones. And I have to say the covering power is surprisingly good for these muted colors. Despite the thin consistency, 2 or at most 3 coats are enough for an even base coat. Makes me wonder how much better the coverage would be if Green Stuff World had made the paints just a little thicker. Also, when it came to picking out the extremely fine strands of hair, I really wished for a bit more body, as I felt the paint was a little hard to control. Now all that's left is to paint the skin and final details, and my little test Stahly in the scarlet red of Samhain will be finished. I'll demo you the other ranges like the metallics and washes in a moment, but first comes my score and final verdict. Honestly, I was a bit put off by the thin consistency at first, but with a bit of practice you can achieve some really smooth results. I think the finished model speaks for itself. I also really like the velvety finish, very matte but without killing all the vibrancy. And then there's the price. On Green Stuff World's site, a single bottle costs less than €3 and they're almost always discounted by around 10%. Add in the quite frequent special promotions with an extra 50% or so off and you can get 70 ml of paint for under €2.50. That makes Green Stuff World one of the most affordable miniature paint ranges, at least in Europe. Still, I do wish the paint had a bit more body and I don't find the color selection particularly exciting. And then there are the bubbles you can get. So I was tempted to give it 8 out of 10 despite my initial struggles, but I've settled on a respectable 7 points. Your mileage may vary, but if you're already an experienced painter who loves working with thin layers and glazes and you're after a budget-friendly range, Maxx Formula is definitely worth a look. Alright, let's quickly run through the other paint lines from Green Stuff World. Maybe we can find another gem there. The heavy opaque range adds another 24 colors and is meant to offer more covering power. The consistency is very similar to Maxx Formula paints, so the extra covering power mainly comes from a higher amount of opaque pigments and fillers. As you can see in this comparison of reds, this makes the colors duller and more pastel. Quite similar to what the Warpaint's Fanatic range does, but with a smoother, thinner consistency. These days, most modern hobby paints boast good coverage, so the heavy opaque paints aren't that much of a standout for me. But for what they are, they do the job fine and add more color variety. Next, the metal colors. These have a slightly thicker consistency than Maxx Formula and require a lot of shaking. Also, on a wet palette, they tend to separate quite quickly. Apart from that, they're not too bad except for the golds, which I just couldn't get to work. And the metallics also have the issue of leaving small bubbles. Then there are, of course, the many effect paints. There's everything from color shift metallics to blood effects, inks, varnishes and more. These would warrant a video on their own, so let me know in the comments which Green Stuff World paints or products you would like me to cover in more detail. And give me a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. I'll guide you through the jungle of miniature paint releases. Green Stuff World also makes washes. Their behavior reminds me a bit of the current generation of Citadel shade paints. They have a high surface tension and find their way quickly into the recesses. The result is really smooth, but sometimes it happens that if too much wash pools in one area, it can crack as it dries, leaving a broken texture. Some of the dipping inks have the same issue, probably due to a shared base medium. Speaking of dipping inks, which are Green Stuff World's answer to contrast and speed paint, are they worth it with their huge 60ml bottles? I'll tell you in this video on the right, so give that a watch next. Thanks a lot and happy hobbying!